Welcome to Tuesday, December 23rd, 2025, your day with the podcast brought to you by the Advocates Injury Attorneys. If you've been injured in an accident, don't face it alone. Get an experienced local Wyoming attorney on your side. Free consultations at wyomingadvocates.com or call 307-800-1952. You deserve an advocate. Well, we're going to have a big stalled West Coast storm. California is going to really get it. Part of the Great Basin and even parts of the desert Southwest. But it's stalled. So for those of you thinking, well, if we have a West Coast storm, that must mean it's on the way. Well, it's going to come through, but only in bits and pieces and fragments as it heads east. But there's going to be big impacts. There's going to be flooding. There's going to be huge snows in the Sierras. The biggest and most active weather will be on the West Coast for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. No high wind warnings or watches are in effect for anywhere in Wyoming or Colorado or Montana or the Dakotas. We finally, after another windy day yesterday, kind of have a break because the pattern's changing. The stalled storm off the West Coast has completely redirected the strong jet stream winds, so we don't have to deal with it. And what you're going to see there is a continuation of mountain snow as that moisture comes in, as you can see. Snow squalls, heavy snow in the Wind River Mountains, while we got a rainbow on the plains as the snow squalls coming off the mountains dissipating, but producing a rainbow. We've got another rainbow picture to show you here in a minute. So along and west of the divide, that's where the action's going to be. Along and east of the divide, it's going to be just extremely warm and dry Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Now, we will have what's left of the California storm. It'll just be a shadow of what it is now. But it is going to bring about a change in the weather. So it's going to come across the divide and into the plains Friday and into Saturday and Sunday. It's going to bring another shot of Arctic air to the upper Midwest and change things up a little bit. But again, it's not going to be nearly as intense. Then at the end of the video, we are going to spend more time on this blocking pattern. We've had some suggestions from podcast viewers on going back and taking a look at the historical perspective of these blocking patterns, which is a great idea. So we'll talk more about that here in a minute. I said I had another rainbow picture. This one again, that same rainbow that Carl got in Lander. Sandra got to be able to see it from the grocery store parking lot. Actually, I'll show you the snowpack figures tomorrow, but the snowpack really has gotten a big boost in Wyoming's western mountains over the last several days. It's been a heavy, wet, water-laden snow, good water content. Now, along and east of the divide, all we really can get, if you're east of the divide, are pretty lenticular photos. That's kind of where we're at in terms of the weather if you're along the Front Range and along and east of I-25, because there's no weather other than these pretty clouds. Now, Jan Curtis put together a great time lapse of the lenticulars yesterday, looking down the Front Range of southern Wyoming into northern Colorado, and we'll put this in motion here. And you can see the lenticulars are forming right on the edge of the wave formation, the wave clouds that form downwind of the Front Range. This is right at the edge of where the air is coming off the mountains. You get the down, then the wave comes up, and the clouds form right along the edge of that wave right there. That's why it looks like they come through and are stationary. Beautiful shot there in Wheatland at the sunrise yesterday at the base of those lenticulars, putting on some color. And you can see that crescent moon, just a little bit of a sliver out there. And again, if you're east of the Continental Divide, you get pretty pictures, but you're not shoveling any snow. Whether you're in Lusk or Belle Fourche, up around that Heart Mountain area, well, a little dusting of snow up on there, catching some of that Pacific moisture coming in off the mountains. But that moisture having a real hard time getting across the divide. A little hint of the Aurora Borealis off there in the distance in the Bighorn Basin here earlier this week. Satellite photo is saying a lot. If you look at the cloud formations here building along the California coast, you can see a lot of clouds moving into California, but I want to point you to this right here. This is just a pipeline of deep moisture coming off the Pacific into California. And if I step back a little bit, here's your zoomed in, but look at the source region of the air flowing into the storm system is coming all the way from these lower latitudes. So the water content of the air right here is deep. There's a lot of water available. Let's say there's a lot of water potential. Now, when you drive this type of moisture into the mountains of the coastal ranges of California, then the Sierra Nevada, you're going to produce a lot of precipitation. And that's going to go just like this, but the Continental Divide here is going to capture most of it west of the divide, as you'll see here in a moment. Look at these precipitable waters. This is by around noon today. Precipitable waters really increasing. So California, you're going to be hearing on the news about flooding and big rains. And the integrated water vapor transport is off the charts. We use this tool to kind of assess the magnitude of what we call those atmospheric rivers that you'll hear about all the time. This is very impressive. When you get on that east-west coast here, as you get near this part of the coast of California that actually goes east-west, that is perpendicular, this flow, to that area. Then you put in those coastal mountains and you're going to get some big rains. You're going to get some big snows in the Sierras as well. And if you look at where the watches and warnings and advisories are on this 23rd day of December, you can see we've got a whole host of flood watches, warnings from the central valleys of California to the deserts of California, winter storm warnings in effect for the mountains, and then they've got high wind warnings in effect for California along that coastal areas there. We're going to see some snow in New England Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, but you can tell the middle of the country here, boring, nothing going on. There's your upper level low at 500 millibars. This is where it's going to be as of around noon today, just off the coast of British Columbia. And then by Christmas Day, it gets more consolidated. Instead of coming off the west coast inland, it just goes down the coast. And as it spreads eastward, it does weaken by Saturday. So notice we've got a strong storm, much weaker storm splitting as it comes into the Rockies. With this upper level low, this is a headache for the models right here, this guy. We'll talk about that here in a minute. This will sweep a cold front through as we get into Friday and Saturday. And it's going to end up dragging some Arctic air into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes by Sunday and Monday. Sub-zero temperatures return to this part of the country here as we get into the early parts of next week. A wild pattern with the jet stream. Here's the block in the Aleutians. Here's your block by Greenland. And so this is causing the jet stream to go way out here before coming back. This is just crazy. And this is going to continue to be a headache for the models to try to figure out. And if this low goes all the way back in retrogrades, as you'll see here in a moment, we've got a lot of look like John Madden football here with drawing all these arrows. But there's a lot going on in those higher latitudes with those blocks. So let's take a look at what's going to happen through tomorrow and Thursday. So this is for the total precipitation for the next 2 days. This takes us through Christmas Day and today. You can see the heavy rains. There's that east-west heavy rain there in Southern California. And you can see the moisture is going to get into Arizona, Nevada, into Oregon and Washington State, Idaho, Wyoming's western mountains. We'll see another dump of heavy, wet, spring-like snows, really. And you're going to start to see some snows get into the southwest mountains of Colorado by late Christmas afternoon. Now, as the system jumps over the divide, we'll see this translate eastward a little bit. Here's your snow totals for the next 3 days. So you can see we're pushing 3 to 4 feet or more. This is only through the next 3 days. California's mountains will see more than that. Then as we get into the period of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this is for the next 3-day period. So for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, more precipitation for California. We will see some better snow here in the ski areas of Colorado, yay, and more snow in Wyoming's western mountains. But you can see there's a little chance of a little bit of moisture sticking out here across the plains and up here as well. But getting something to happen east of the divide, you need upslope. You need some type of upslope pattern, and you're not going to get it in this predominantly western flow, west to east flow coming in off the Pacific. Nonetheless, there will be a shot of snow Friday and Saturday in particular for the high country again, and even into the lower elevations of the Great Basin, where temperatures are certainly going to be getting colder. There's a pretty good shot of Arctic air that's going to come in as we get into Sunday and Monday. There it is. This is by Monday morning. All the gray here are temperatures that are below zero. The purples, right there, you're going to be single digits to near zero. And once again, where is the direction of the Arctic air going? To the same places it's been. Now, we do need to watch. This Arctic air boundary may end up coming a little bit further west, but a little bit ahead of the game there to talk about that here in a minute. So this is by Sunday. I talked about just a confused weather pattern with these two blocks, the Greenland block and the Aleutians block. It's just causing the jet stream to get all stretched more east and west, but make loops. But then we have this cutoff low that wants to be held back up here into California. What happens up here is going to dictate what happens New Year's week. And right now, some of this is defying the laws of physics, honestly. I think the models are having a really hard time in this part of the world understanding what's going to happen. So we're not even going to really talk about past Sunday. In the meantime, let's talk about these blocking patterns a little bit. Let's take a look at a historical perspective. So using some AI tools, whether it's ChatGPT or the other ones that are out there, you can go in and ask it. And I suggest you play around in doing with it. But we went and asked, when did we have in other winter seasons both a Greenland block in the North Atlantic and an Aleutians block? And what were the years in recent history of the last 3 decades where this has happened before? Well, we've got 4 different winter seasons here going back to 2010 to 2023. What's really interesting about this is not all of these 4 blocking patterns resulted in the exact same thing. You think it would, but it doesn't. Hence, this is why it gets a little bit tricky. But this is where you try to find out where we have some historical precedent to what's happening now, and we do. So this has happened before is the point, and I could go back into the 80s and 90s and 70s and 60s and find you other episodes like this. But let's go back to where we have recent memories. So we had 2 blocking patterns 2 years in a row, 2010 and 11, 2011 and 12, and then 2018 and 19, and actually the big snow year actually had somewhat of a similar situation. But I'm not going to include that year because that was a bit of an anomaly, mainly because of the Tonga volcanic eruption played a big role in, or could have played a big role in that winter season. So let's take a look at where we had those blocking patterns. What I'm going to show you here is we're going to go back in historical terms. There's the year and the month right here. Where you see blue, think a low. Where you see high, okay, or the yellow, think of a high pressure ridge. So one of the analogs, the strongest analog, was the winter of 2010 and 11. This is for the month of December. And what do we have? Exactly what we have going on now. This is remarkable. We have this persistent low near British Columbia just parked there with the blocking high there and the blocking high in Greenland and the Aleutians. This is how the month of December has gone here so far. Case in point, I went and I looked at the first 3 weeks of December of this year, and there are your anomalies, okay? And there's your anomaly off the coast of British Columbia. Pretty remarkable, okay? This is why analog tools can sometimes be a help. They don't figure out everything, but this shows you that, yeah, we saw a very, very similar pattern in 2010 and 2011. And if we go and take a look at where we are with these anomalies, they're very strong. So that was 2010. This is actually where we are now. Look how strong that blocking anomaly is right there, and then the growing anomaly right there. So it's not apples to apples, it's not exact, but the weather never repeats exactly. What you want to look at are trends. So what happened as we went into 2011? Well, what we saw in 2011 is the blocking pattern in the Aleutians became more of a block over Alaska, and the block that was keeping the low off the coast of British Columbia became more of a high, while the blocking pattern in Greenland continued. So basically what happened in January of that year, of 11, is the block shifted east, and the block stayed there in Greenland. Then as we got into February, the block retreated. And we didn't have as much of a block, but it was still there, and we had the trough come into part of the western United States. But basically what you see here is the wiggling back and forth. The block can shift. That's what they've done historically. They can be parked in one area for weeks, go park themselves in another area, then go right back to where they were. Then as we got into March of 2011, the blocking pattern weakened as you would expect it to in March. That's what will happen as you start to change seasons. One thing that's really interesting, One of the bigger snowpack years, especially in the upper North Platte Basin, was actually March, April. And March and April brought huge amount of snow to the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies because as the block weakened, we saw a lot of this blue come into the Western United States in March and April. So we started the winter of 2010 and 11 just like what we're doing right now. If we look at another analog year, this was brought up by Barry in Nebraska. He asked AI, same thing, but asked the question a little bit differently. What we didn't have in 2013 and 14 was a strong Greenland block, but we had a very strong Aleutians block. And notice this block is very similar to what we have right now. If I go back a few slides here, there it is. You see how it's elongated and moved out like this. So if we go back to 2013, a similar pattern, although the high pressure has been more of a low pressure system so far this winter here. There's the first 3 weeks of December in 2013. Again, not exactly the same, but similar. The point here is this has happened before. So if we can go back and look at what happened before and see how the rest of the winter season looks, we get different results. And in 2013 and 14, we saw a strong ridge shift out of the Aleutians and then went into the West Coast and along Canada. And that directed all the winter here and kept the West very warm and dry. Then as we go into February that year, the block came back and went westward again, but it went far enough west that it allowed the jet stream to dip further south. But again, that kept most of the winter weather to the north and east of the western United States. And then as we got into March, by then the blocks are gone. So your blocking patterns are going to happen in December, January, and February. You got to wait till March before they're going to evaporate. Now, what about years that bring us big snows? One of the bigger snow years was December 2007 into the first several months of 2008. What I want to show you here is how important the placement of the high pressure patterns are in the Pacific for the western United States to have a big snowy cold year. If the high is here in December, that means your low pressure system is going to be more in the Intermountain West and the Western High Plains. That's what we saw in December of 2007. January of 2008, the high stayed in the same place. So look where the blue is, look where the low is. Then as we got into February, it shifted a little bit more to the West Coast, but then we had a feeder low into Canada and Alaska, sending systems down, keeping the winter very wet, stormy, and cold. And then you can see in March, the high pressure stayed there, and that kept systems coming into the west. So where the high is, you can see where you want the sweet spot to be. You really want the sweet spot to be somewhere in this vicinity right here. But if it's right here, you're out of luck. If it's right here, you're out of luck in the west. So you will see through the course of the winter these ridges shift, and that's when you get winter weather. But if the predominant high pressure pattern is there, that's when you get the snowier, colder winter seasons. So the high placement is critical on how your winter season's going to go. And if you take a look at the long range forecast that we had at the beginning of November, so this is for November 1st, the European model, which is our best seasonal model, was predicting a high pressure. It did a good job of predicting the high pressure there over the Aleutians, but also high pressure kind of right down here as well, as you can see the colors. And you can see the white and the blue. Wherever you see white, it's going to be cold. The blue is where it's going to be the coldest. So on November 1, the outlook for December for a lot of the country, really coast to coast, was cold. And that's what a lot of the weather forecasts were thinking. That's what I was thinking. For the whole month of December, this pattern was very, very persistent for several months. But in reality, on December 1st, the model changed. And all of a sudden, we have this strong ridge, which is actually in a good spot here, but there's your Aleutian block. And there's your Greenland block forming. So what ended up happening is, you can see the blue got very cold there, but in reality, it's more like this. So this ridge here has been more eastward than connecting up to the Aleutians block. Sometimes weather is a game of inches. We'll have more for you tomorrow. Have yourself a good Tuesday.